figure out your story. So you can figure out what do you want and then figure out why you want it. So I was working with a guy once and I said, what are your values? And he said, well, my number one value in life is money. And I said, okay, well, actually money is something you want, but it's not your value. So tell me your story about money. And he said, well, when I was younger, I didn't have any money. When I came home from school, I didn't know where I was going to sleep. I didn't know if I was going to eat. The only meal I was guaranteed each day was at school. And it was my school lunch. And he said, now that I'm older, I've got a wife, I've got a child. I want to make absolutely certain that they've always got a roof over their head and they've always got 3 meals a day. And I said, I think what you're saying is that your value is actually security. That's what you're going for. He said, you're right. That's it. I want security. That is a key thing for me. That matters to me. It matters that I give that to the people around me. And so he wanted money, but the story around money told me what his value was. So again, people can write down, what do you actually really want? But then write the story. Why does that matter?
Hey, what's up, Masters? Welcome to another episode of Path to Mastery podcast. Today, we are with the body talk expert, Richard Newman. How are you, sir?
I'm very good, thanks, David. Yeah, how about yourself?
Oh, man, I'm doing very good myself. Excited to talk to you today about communication, mindset, storytelling. I was saying before we started recording, these are like some of my favorite, besides my family, but my family and God, but then these are like my favorite things to talk about. So I'm excited to have you here today, man.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And just to let people know who you are the founder of Body Talk. Over the past 21 years, your team has trained over 100,000 business leaders around the world to improve communication and impact, including one client who gained over 1 billion in new business in just 1 year, using the strategies that you teach. That's big, man. 1 billion in a year. I love that. So I want some of that, man. Yeah, train me up on that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And what is Body Talk, though? We'll start there. Tell us what Body Talk is.
Sure. So Body Talk is my company. I'm the founder of the company. I've been building this team now for more than 2 decades. And it really started as a hobby where I'm very passionate about communication. I always have been. So from when I was a child, I really struggled with the communication with other people. And I didn't know what that was all about. And I realized that actually I was a step behind other people with communication. So I invested my time in reading books on this subject area. And between the age of 16 and about 25 years old, I read about 200 books on the subject of communication, all around body language and tone of voice and stage presence and storytelling and anything I could get my hands on really to improve my skills there. And then I also spent some time living in the Tibetan monastery in the foothills of the Himalayas, where I was living there for 6 months, teaching English to people who didn't speak a word of English. And so I had to develop my body talk because they didn't know what my words meant. So I had to use my body language and my tone of voice to connect with these monks and help them learn my language, which was a fascinating experience. And I was there cut off from the rest of the world for about 6 months, where this is back in the 1990s, where they didn't have Wi-Fi. I didn't have a mobile phone back then. So there's no texting, WhatsApping, social media, nothing like that. And they didn't even have hot running water until I arrived there. And if someone wanted to send me a letter when I was in this monastery, it would take 6 weeks for the letter to arrive from the UK where I live. And so if I wrote them a reply the same day, it would take 3 months for someone to hear from me. And so there I was, cut off from the world, living with these monks. And it was this amazing opportunity just to communicate non-verbally. And by the end of the 6 months I was with them, they could then speak English very well. I learned how to speak Nepali back to them, which was the main language of the area. It was the easiest language for me to learn, a lot easier to learn than Tibetan. And then I came back to the UK. I studied acting for a few years. And then I set up my company, Body Talk, really on a mission to help people find their voice, to help people be heard, make sure that when you speak, you get the respect and results that you really deserve. And that has led us to these incredible results. Like you mentioned, there was this client who came to us. This was a construction company a few years ago where they said they were bidding for big government contracts. And it would take them about 18 months to try and land one of these. And they were winning about 1 in 4, which is a huge investment for them to be making into all this time and then losing 75% of the time. Mm-hmm. And so we worked with them over the space of a year. We did a 2-day workshop before every major bid that they did, bring their team together to teach them storytelling, communication, mindset, anything they would need. And during the course of that year, they won every single time. So going from 1 in 4 to winning 100% of the time and getting over $1 billion worth of business. And we've been seeing that for clients worldwide. So we work with people all over the world. We work in different languages as well. My team now gets booked about 2,000 times per year to go and teach people. And we just love helping people figure out their communication style and using tools that everyone can use to elevate their results.
I love it. You know what? It's funny when you were talking about being just kind of disconnected with the monks. Actually sounds fun. Sounds fun. Sounds nice to have that happen every once in a while, but it also reminds me of going way back. I've been selling for 36 years. Back then, we weren't really disconnected, but you didn't have cell phones, right? You didn't have internet. You didn't have email. It was different. You needed to talk to someone. You either met them in person or you went to a payphone, right? And so I think that how much has that the level of, well, before I even get into that question, I think that's a great question, but I'd like to know, like, what is probably the biggest thing you took away from being with those monks, kind of disconnected from everything else for, what was it, 6 months of your life?
Yeah.
What was the biggest takeaway that you took from that?
So there's huge elements there. And firstly, I would suggest if anyone has kids who want to go off and travel the world before they go to university or so on, I just say encourage them to do so, because it was totally transformative. Being there with them, I'd gone from a place where I'd never traveled overseas without my parents before. And then there I was traveling across India. When I landed in Delhi, it took me about 36 hours by train and bus to figure out how to get up to this place where this monastery was, and then a little taxi to take me there. And it took forever to get there. And all of my friends had placed a bet on how soon I would be home. And the longest bet anyone had made on me was 10 days. And they knew I was supposed to be going for 6 months. And I thought I have to survive longer than 10 days so I can win this bet. And so there I was living in this monastery where suddenly I got my independence. I got that sense of, wow, I'm the other side of the world, and I'm having to figure out life by myself without anyone around me to really connect with and who can understand what I have to say. Everything was unfamiliar. There wasn't a single white face around, and I grew up in a place where that would be unusual, and so people were staring at me. I was about a foot taller than most people. The head monk of the monastery, who's the tallest monk in the monastery, was way shorter than me. He came up to about my shoulder height, and so I was sort of standing out like this odd beacon in the middle of all these different people. But what it taught me about communication was really important. This is something that I brought back with me, is that there was only really one way for me to effectively communicate with them, which is I had to have congruency, which is simply defined by your body language, voice, and words all going in exactly the same direction. And if I did that, then I could teach them something. So for example, if I wanted to teach them the word excited, if I didn't look excited and I didn't sound excited, they'd have no idea what I was saying. And so, I could have been saying the word pineapple. They'd have no idea. So I had to make sure everything I did was completely and utterly congruent. And it gave me the perspective of trying to figure out the simplest, most concise way of explaining something and doing it in a way that made sense to somebody where they were not familiar with my language in any way. So how would I be able to communicate in the clearest, most concise, most engaging way that they would stick in their minds? And I brought that back to how I now run my training. But particularly, I teach that method of congruency to people where you see too many people in business where what they're saying and how they're acting is going in two different directions. Even if they are completely honest people with high integrity, they have habits that are pulling them in the wrong direction. And this is usually because people have this phrase where they say, this product sells itself, or this idea speaks for itself. And it doesn't. You have to speak for the idea. And so how you represent it is going to translate into how people feel about the idea, how they react to that product or service. And so we're forever trying to pull away bad habits that people have that are holding back their congruency, allowing them to flourish in that way. And I often say to my clients, I want you to deliver this in such a way that my monks would understand it, because if they wouldn't understand it, you're not being clear enough. And suddenly they get it. So it's been a nice tool to use ever since.
That's cool. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of when learning fundamentally, like when you're storytelling or teaching, you want to communicate in a way that a child could understand it, right? A 6-year-old, which is similar, right? So I think a lot of
Yeah.
us, we go over people's heads. But I do want to talk a little bit more about the incongruency, because that's a great takeaway. And I think, can you give us like an example of somebody that their body language, their voice, their tone is in sales or any other area? Like what does that look like, being incongruent?
Yeah, so I think so I'll take an example of, I'm often booked to speak on stage at events, at conferences, sales kickoff events, and so on. And what tends to happen at those events is that I'm usually the third speaker to go on stage. So the CEO comes up and is quite often a charismatic or a person who's very experienced being on stage, and they go up and they do their thing. And so I'm left backstage with the CFO, and then it's going to be me. And the CFO is going to go up next and talk about the numbers. And because the CFO is focused on numbers, they're generally not the person who really wants to speak, but they kind of have to because people expect them to. And occasionally they'll turn to me and say, oh, you're doing body talk. Oh, yeah. I don't really need that because the numbers speak for themselves. So I'm just going to do what I do. And then they'll go up and, you got hundreds or thousands of people in the room, and they stand behind the lectern and they'll say, hi, everyone. Really excited to be here. It's good to see you. And, the numbers are good. The numbers are getting better. So enjoy the event. And people are listening to them thinking, this is our CFO. This CFO seems to be miserable, or they seem to be disappointed. Is there something I need to know about? Maybe I should leave my job. Maybe I should go and work somewhere else, because this person doesn't seem to really believe that we're in a great place. And so, and I exaggerate to make the point, but you'll find that people are going in these different directions when they communicate. Now, if you translate that then into sales, it's really funny when you get people who are putting across a message and they just don't understand that what they're doing is going in the wrong direction for the person they're speaking to. So as an example on this, and this one actually, salespeople love this. So if this is more the core of your audience, I just want you to imagine this. Imagine you're sitting across from somebody, and if anyone's listening to this podcast, I encourage you, watch the video, and then you'll see what I'm doing here. So if you think about it, if you put a graph on a screen, and just imagine that, just visualize this graph on a screen. On one side of the screen is a 0, and on the other side of a screen is 100. Which side is the 100 on? The 100 is on the right-hand side. If you have January on one side of the screen and December on the other side of the screen, which side is January? The January is on the left-hand side. So we know that people see time. They see time going from left across to right. That's how people see time going. So they go from past to present to future. That's how we see time traveling. But when we're thinking about it, when we're explaining something to somebody, we do the opposite. So if I was to gesture to you the way that feels right to me, I'd say past, present, and future. And that's going the wrong way across the screen for you. It's going in the wrong direction. And so you'll see people doing this as salespeople. They don't realize this past and future gesturing. So they go against it. They're being incongruent. And they'll say something like, in the past, there was this device that was not very good, gesturing to what is the audience's future, but it's their past. They'll say, in the past, this is what we were doing. This is what we would recommend. In the future, we're sort of heading off over here, and this is where you should go. And the person doesn't understand why, but their brain is just mashed up by this incongruency of these gestures. Whereas if you want to convince someone about what they should do, if you have congruent gestures with timeline, you can say to them, look, I understand that in the past, this is what you were doing, and that's what you felt was the right decision for you in terms of your products and services. Right now, I need to tell you that people are changing the way that they do things, and they're getting better results than you are. Gesturing to the present. Then you gesture to the future and say, just imagine this. Just imagine by the end of next year, you're able to do this, be this, achieve this. And you've gestured in the right direction. And for whatever reason, their brain just says that's congruent. Congruency equals charisma. I feel engaged with this. It just feels right. I don't know why, but subconsciously, I think, ding, 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 I want to buy into what you have to say. And so you can use that not just for sales, but just for clarity as well. If you want to speak to somebody and just gesture in a way that makes sense for their brain. So the entire message, therefore, your words, your slides, your ideas, your gestures, everything is going in the right direction, and that can really transform your impact.
Interesting. So it's funny because this is something that I sometimes forget on camera, right? Like so this is so what I'm gesturing now to me looks like past. Does it look like past to you as well?
Yeah, I don't know if your camera is mirrored or not, but it looks like past to me. Yeah, yeah. So
Okay, all
you're
right.
right.
So it's right.
Your
Okay,
right
and
hand
then
would be past. Yeah,
present and then future. Okay, got it.
yeah,
Okay, good. But sometimes I forget because you're on camera and you're on video and you're right, but you don't really think subtly how that's affecting the other person, right? Like that's I think what you're getting at right now,
yeah.
which is powerful. And I love the example too you gave of your like yeah, hey, I'm really really excited to be here today. Yeah,
Yeah.
really excited, right? Like like do you? Because it's ironic. I went to a networking group last week. Somebody invited me to come check out their networking group, and they're like 30 people, and so they start the group. The president gets up, does his thing, and then he gives it to the vice president. And the vice president's supposed to give a report. He gets up and he says, "Yeah, I just haven't had a chance to do the numbers this week. It's been a long week. I'm sorry." And everybody's just sitting there like, this is friggin' kind of weird, right? Like now, me, I'm a guest. I don't want to join this group, right? Like it didn't even make sense to me. And
Yeah.
so yeah, to me anyway, it kind of reminded me of somebody getting up and just not either being prepared or just not taking it serious or not even maybe not even wanting to be there, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
then I think people pick up on that. Richard is
Yeah,
what I'm.
exactly. This is something actually I learned early on in networking events. I've never really enjoyed networking. It's not a place that I thrive. I thrive better on stage rather than doing that sort of one-to-one, getting to know people. But I learned this in body language early on. If there's incongruency with someone, you can see if they actually want to talk with you or not. And so essentially, the person's feet will tell you where they want to be. So someone's head could be facing towards you and they're sort of nodding along and they seem to be smiling at you and so on. But if you just take a look at their body, their lower body and their feet in particular, their feet will be pointing in the direction that they wish they were. So if their feet are pointed towards you, that's good news. They want to be in this conversation. They want to stay there. But if their head is towards you, and then their body, and particularly their feet, are pointing towards the door or towards the bar, maybe, or towards someone else they want to go and speak to, then there's really no point in keeping going with that conversation. They're essentially saying, stop talking because I've had enough and I want to go and speak to somebody else.
Wow.
So you've got to look for the full congruency in the body language there to really know where that person stands.
I love it. That's good, man. I thank you. That's something I had not ever heard before. That's super awesome. So I want to go back to the communication thing, though. We started. You talked about being away from communication for 6 months, and I had brought up technology now as opposed to years and years ago. I feel like I was. I wouldn't say I was more effective. I'm probably more effective now just because I know more. But we were just as effective without all the without email, without cell phones, right? It's like how is the level now of social media, email, just how has that affected our level to connect with other people and communicate?
Yeah, it's a great question, and technology has really impacted communications in ways that I could never have imagined when I was back in school age. Where, like you say, I remember vividly those times where if you're going to meet your friends on the weekend, you had to agree while you're at school. What is it? Where are we going to meet? What time are we going to meet? How are we going to know that we're going to be all showing up at the right time? And then you had to show up at the clock at 11 a.m. because if you weren't there by 11:10, people had gone. So these days, the way that we communicate has completely changed in so many different ways. But we've got to this place where people are very reliant on technology to the point where, and I saw this particularly shift after the pandemic, that we are much less skilled at face-to-face communication. We've got much better skills at digital communication, which is nice, but we all know that face-to-face communication is the most effective thing. If you're in the room with somebody, there is a chemistry that is built between the two of you that you cannot match online. You can do lots of great things, and virtual communication has helped us in so many ways, and I'm grateful that it was there in the pandemic. But I always remember the first workshops I started to teach people in person, when it was back after the lockdowns, when we were allowed to go and meet people again, there was a woodenness, there was a rigidness in the way that people would walk in the room and they'd look at you thinking, oh, hang on, there's actually another human being here. I'm only used to having a screen. And they look at you thinking, do I shake your hand? Do I wave? Do I fist bump? Do I bow? What am I supposed to do in this situation? And they sort of awkwardly just move around and sit down at the other end of the table and look at you and look at others, and then maybe look at their phone again. And so we've had this dramatic drop in the amount of time that people spend face-to-face. So FaceTime on a screen has gone up, but face-to-face time, real face-to-face time, has dramatically gone down. And so we're working very hard with people to overcome issues that have happened there. There's a lot of more conflict that's coming up. We're finding that there is a lot more loneliness in the workplace. Even if people are going into work and they're surrounded by people, there is a lack of connection that's happening there. It's more transactional, that people have this lack of connection or deeper relationships there, which is important. If people are listening from a sales perspective, it's so important to know that, because if you're the person that's able to break through, if you work on your communication skills, if you can build a deeper connection with someone, they'll feel so grateful to actually feel seen, heard, and connected with another human being, that they are far more likely to want to work with you, to want to build a long-term working relationship with you. And so we've got to be mindful of that and not overly reliant on technology, and do whatever we can to get back to that human to human being communication.
Is there a and I want to jump, if I can, two things. Well, by the way, we have about 30 people on Clubhouse right now, so appreciate you guys being here live. If anybody has a question for Richard, again, this is a live interview. You're welcome. Raise your hand. We'll bring you up. You can ask Richard a question about what we're talking about right now. So feel free to raise your hands if you have a question. I want to talk a little bit about AI in a minute. Because I got to imagine AI is affecting a lot of us when it comes to communication. But I'm curious as to what you were just talking about. Are there any strategies that you could share with our listeners, like even just one, to say, okay, here's a way to maybe be more connected with somebody in person, right? When you're with somebody.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So there was something I was teaching actually to a group recently. I think 2 weeks ago, I was at the National Sales Conference here in the UK, which I've been privileged to speak at many times. And I was talking to them there about how do you build deeper relationships with people, because we know that people are more likely to buy from you if they like you, they trust you, they want to spend time around you, they feel that you care about them as well. And so I said, I'd like you to analyze your questions, and everybody can do this in the following week. Just see what happens in all the interactions you have, personally and professionally. What type of questions are you asking? So the first level of questions that people tend to ask, and people ask this a lot in sales, in business, but they'll also ask it with their friends and family too, is a first level question is a fact and data question. Fact and data questions. This is where you say to somebody, what time is that report due? What number did we get? What KPIs are we hitting? Who's on the team? All these sorts of different questions. And they're important to gather context around a situation, but some people only stay there. And then in a sales situation, they may be asked to leave, where the person says, do you know what? I've run out of time. Sorry, you have to leave. And the reason being, if you ask someone 5 fact and data questions, great. It gathers context. The person feels safe. No issues there at all. If you ask somebody 25 fact and data questions, it feels like an interrogation. And the person will start to think, why are you quizzing me so much? I don't like this sort of thing. So it's fine initially. But then what you need to dig down into is the second level questions, which is around feelings, thoughts, and opinions. And this is what tends to happen. If we know somebody really well, then when we see them, they don't say to you, what time did you wake up this morning? Instead of that, they say, how are you feeling today? They go into that area. And you can do this with clients, prospects, people on your team. You can just say, hey, I'm working on this project. What are your thoughts on this? What's your opinion here? What sort of feeling do you get from working with that person? And we like this because it allows us to open up. The sort of answer you get back from that person is likely to be 5 times as long even more so perhaps, because you're really asking them about something that isn't just fact or data, that's sort of proof or evidence. It's asking about their reaction, their personal reaction to a situation, or their personal expertise or wisdom. And people love being asked about that. So that allows you greater insights into them, and it makes them feel more connected with you. Now, notice though, it depends on how you say it. If you've got a good rapport with the person, if you ask them about their thoughts, feelings, and opinions, then they're likely to open up. But if you don't have good rapport, you can ask someone, how do you feel about this project? And they'll ask her with a first level answer. They won't come down to the second level with you. So you say, how do you feel about this? They'll say, well, I think the numbers for last month were 17.9. And you think, oh, okay, they're not ready to come into rapport with me. I'm doing something else. I need to work on my body language. I need to work on something else in a way that's going to make this person feel comfortable, develop trust, and so on. So you'll know if they're working with you on a good relationship level. If you ask a
So let
second
me
level
just pause
question.
for a minute. So the people listening, so basically what just happened is you asked them a feelings-based question, right? Or yeah, feeling, but they gave you a thought fact-based answer. Is that
Exactly
how you
right.
picked up on? Yeah.
Exactly
All
right.
right.
Yeah, and sometimes people will do that because they just don't feel safe with you, or it could be they don't feel safe in the room. It could be that there's maybe someone senior around them and they don't want to give away how they feel, or they don't want to get an answer wrong, and so you can get that happening sometimes. So it's generally around a feeling of safety and trust. Then once you've built up safety and trust, and you ask a feelings, thoughts, and opinions question, and you get a feelings, thoughts, or opinions answer, then you can go down to third level. And third level is where you're understanding from the person what their motives and drivers are. What is most important to them, and what are the reasons for them making a decision. Now, importantly, as I phrased that, I didn't use the word why. You are essentially asking them why, but you're not using the word why. And the reason being, all of us have been, back when we were 4 or 5 years old, we smashed something on the kitchen floor and our parent or guardian said, why? And ever since then, we've had this defensive reaction to the word why in different contexts for different people. And so if you want to understand why somebody is doing something, if you just take out the word why and use the word what instead, what's most important to you about this? What's the main reason for you wanting to take this action? Then it allows them to uncover their why in a way that feels safe to them. And again, you might find, if they don't trust you, if they're not going with you, they may go back to a fact related answer where you say, what's the main reason for choosing this? And they'll say, I think it's because the KPIs last quarter matched our expectations. And you think, well, that's okay. They're not coming with me at all. Rather than they might say, look, if you want to know the real reason, we just don't trust the old provider. Things went pear-shaped with them, and we got to move on from this. And the fact remains that actually my boss is really insistent that we figure things out with somebody new, because they're driving hard towards a goal they've got for the end of this quarter, and they're relying on me to make this happen. And suddenly you know something about them that you didn't know before because you bothered to actually figure this out. And I would always say to people, it's important to ask these questions respectfully. It's not about manipulation. It's about genuinely trying to figure out, who is this person? What do they need right now? What matters to them? And can I be of service to them? And if you can't be of service to them when you figure that out, if you say, right now, that's not what I'm going to be able to give you, but I do know somebody else who can help, they'll come back to you, and you've got a lifelong relationship because they're the kind of person who's just opened up to you. You respected their trust, that sort of thing. So I'd encourage everybody listening, try for the next 7 days. Just notice in every conversation, what type of questions are you asking and what level of answer are you getting back, and see how many third level questions and answers you can get to in conversations.
That's awesome. Thank you, man. I love it. This is good. So when I'm like, I've been doing sales 36 years, and I'm learning stuff now that I hadn't heard before. That's awesome. Thank you. Let's talk about AI, and then we'll jump into your book. AI, how's AI affecting the level of communication right now? And
Well, I'd say right now, AI is not affecting things much. I know that people are trying it. People have told me that it's good, but it's not there yet. It's not replacing human beings completely yet in the interactions that my clients have tried to put this into action with. But I'm sure it's going to get there. And I think that no matter where we think, oh, you can't replace what a human being could do with the communication, I think if AI lives up to the promise that everybody says it's going to have, this spectacular ability to replicate what we do in a better and more efficient way, then it will figure out how to look, sound, and feel like it's another human being. But what I think it's going to do even further than that, is that we'll get to a place where we might start to realize every news article we read, everything that we read online, every article that we might come across has actually been written by AI and not a human being. And we're going to start to get to that place where we just want connection more. And so I think that what we might see in communication shift is a bit like the music industry. So in the music industry, musicians used to make their money through record sales, and they would occasionally do a concert that would give them a bit more money, but it's basically record sales is where they're making their money. Whereas over a period of time, they've got to the point where now, because of things like streaming platforms and Spotify and all these things, they make the vast majority of their money from live events. Because now we put a premium on, I'm actually meeting the person. They are right there. In fact, last night I went and I saw Madonna. It was her last night of her European tour, and
Madonna
she was
still on tour. Holy cow!
Yeah, she was. Yeah, quite amazing. I think she's 64 years
Yeah, I
old,
was gonna say,
and she was stood about
cool.
2 meters away from me. I was there with my
Wow.
wife, and we were thinking, wow, this is, it's the first time we've ever seen Madonna in person. We went because we thought it's probably going to be a great show. And, people were paying a huge amount of money to be there. And if you take a look at, Taylor Swift has just been named Person of the Year. And to get tickets to her show, it's something like $2 or $3 grand just to, to get anywhere where you can actually see what's going on the stage. And so that's where they're making their money. Now, translate that across to communication. I think that that the value that we place on face-to-face interactions with people is going to go up, and I've seen this actually across our industry, where what happened during the pandemic is nobody was really sure what to charge for doing a virtual event, and people thought, well, I should probably charge less because maybe I'm not traveling as much to do a virtual event that I would be in person. And it got to the point where people said, actually, no, I'm just going to charge the same amount for a virtual event that I used to charge for in person. And then when in-person events came back, the fees for people were ×4 the amount that they were before, because there's now a premium on actually getting on a plane and going and working at an event. But I think that sort of piece can be translated to actually having somebody in the room, where if you're the kind of salesperson, to come back to your specialist area, if you're the kind of salesperson that makes the effort to travel 2 or 3 hours to go to someone's office and physically sit in the space with them and have a great connection with them, I think that is going to be so powerful, because we love, as human beings, we cannot get away from the fact we love the chemistry of being in another room, of being in a room with another person, which, as powerful as AI selling is going to be, and I think people can embrace it and it will have lots of good, powerful effects for us in our lives. If you can be at that point where you are still connecting with another human being as a human, it's going to have a higher value than it ever did before.
So one of our I got a message here from someone on Clubhouse, said, this is amazing. I would love to watch the video, please. Yeah, you can literally watch it on my YouTube channel. It's streaming, so I dropped the link up on the top. So make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is David I. Hill. That's it, David I. Hill. And also, you have a book, Richard, Lift Your Impact. So tell us a little bit about your book, and then how can people get a copy of your book?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning. So I've got this book that came out in May this year, Lift Your Impact. And I wrote another book actually going back about 5 years ago, where I thought it took so much hard work to create a book, as you'll know, with being an author too. It takes so much. I thought, I'm never doing another one. And then what happened in the pandemic is that our clients started to come to us with different challenges than we'd ever seen. I've been already teaching people for 2 decades, and then suddenly their needs totally shifted. And so I thought, I have to help them with this. And it's actually not a book, you might think it must be focused on virtual communication. Actually, it's not. There's 3 things that we noticed that shifted in what people needed. So firstly, we found that a lot of people during the pandemic and since then have had much more stress in their lives than they had previously. And so it's measured by various different sources of how many people are stressed in the workplace, in a position of overwhelm or leading towards burnout. I think the latest number I saw on that was around 75% of the workforce feeling that they have far too much to do. And if people can reference this, if you think back to 2018, 2019, if you had a busy day, it might be 3 meetings where you'd have to drive to one, do it, and then drive to the next one. 3 meetings was a big day. These days, people have 12 meetings where it's just back to back to back to back, Zoom calls, Teams calls, and so on. We have 400 emails. There's less people working in a company that's streamlined, and you've got higher targets that you've got to hit, and so on. So people are feeling hugely stressed. Secondly, people are feeling less connected with each other than they were previously. And thirdly, people are finding a lack of purpose. So some people are showing up at the same steel and glass building that they were going into before and just scratching their head thinking, I don't even know why I'm doing this anymore. So there was an interesting study on this recently that in the UK and in the US, I believe it's for the first time on record, the last 2 years, life expectancy has gone down, whereas previously it was always going up, or at least staying level. And the best that researchers can take from this is that they think it's due to a lack of meaningfulness, a lack of purpose that people have right now. Because when we all took a step back from our day-to-day lives and were locked in our homes for a few months in this pandemic, people really question, what am I doing? Why am I showing up at that building doing that same thing? Maybe selling that thing I don't believe in, or speaking to that person who I don't really like. What am I doing all of this for? And so I wrote this book in order to help people with those 3 areas. So firstly, to have a rock solid mindset so you can be a rock in the storm, no matter what's going on around you in the economy and politics in your industry, you can still be the best version of you. Secondly, to help people have a greater sense of influence on the people around them and a greater sense of connection. And then once you've worked on your mindset, you've got this greater influence and connection. Then it's looking at meaningfulness into the future. What can you do in order to transform your future and lift the future for you and for others around you through strategies that will create that long-term lasting transformation? And I turned it into it's like a 300-page workbook. So people can take part, and they write notes on sort of every other page, and they make it their own as they go through. So they're really participating in the transformation through the book. So I was really pleased we put it together and that our clients have liked it.
Sounds like a great book. What's the best way for listeners to get a copy of the book?
So the book's available in all kinds of places: Amazon, obviously, Barnes and Noble, and pretty much all good online book retailers worldwide. People should be able to get a copy, and they can get either the hardback or the audio book, which is narrated by me, which was a fun experience of sitting in a narrating booth for about 14 hours in the dark, just narrating the audiobook. And also there's a Kindle or e-reader version of the book too.
Awesome. It's funny. I listened to, I don't know if do you follow Lex Friedman? Do you know who Lex Friedman is?
I don't know. I don't think so.
He's a big podcaster. He just had Elon on. He's had Joe Rogan's been on his podcast. Like he's big time. Check him out.
Check him out.
Lex Friedman. Yeah. But his interviews are between 2 and 3 hours, similar to Joe. Obviously know Joe Rogan. Yeah. So and his friends with Joe Rogan, ironically. But anyway, I always think like, man, how do these guys do 2 to 3 hours? And it's interesting, but I feel like I could have done that with you today, because this is a super interesting conversation. So I just want to say I appreciate that. And it's really, really good stuff. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to do that today. So maybe we'll do a round 2 at some point. But I do want to let people know, well, first off, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you, our listeners, after they get a copy of your book?
Great, thanks. Yeah, so the best way to find me and my team is ukbodytalk.com. And that's how you can access, what we are and what we do, and resources on there as well. And people can find me on LinkedIn is the main place I am on social media, Richard Newman Body Talk. And lastly, I'm on Instagram, which is at Richard Newman Speaks.
Okay, awesome. And I want to wrap here today, Richard. You mentioned the word at the end, meaningfulness. That's a big one for a lot of people. How does somebody find the meaning?
Yeah, great question.
It's a tough question to answer, right? But give us we'll end on a little hack that will maybe help a lot of people at least go in the right direction.
Great. Okay. Well, the first piece that I would talk about with that is that in order to get meaning, you have to understand what your values are. And because, you can work on a goal. Everybody's done this, I'm sure, where they work on a goal and it's taken them months or years, and they get there and they feel a bit empty and they think, why do I feel empty? I thought I was supposed to feel euphoric at this point. What is that about? And the part of the reason can be that they went away from one of their values. So people have talked about values a lot over the last few years, but I would encourage people to get out a piece of paper and just spend 15 minutes writing down what do you think your top 3 values are? And by values, I mean, what are the principles that you want to use to lead your life, whatever they might be for you? So as an example, my top value for me happens to be a good parent. And my second value is to inspire and empower my clients. And so it's sort of long phrases, whereas sometimes people have a value of honesty or freedom or security and so on. And so you've got to really be clear about what is it, and then write a paragraph about why that matters to you. What is it? How has that shaped your life? Where did you get it from? Was it your grandma who used to live her life that way and she so inspired you? You want to be like grandma, and you tend to think, what would grandma do in this situation? Or where does that value come from? So you get really connected with yourself. Then to get meaningfulness, you think, if I really truly live my values, if I honestly live them to the best of my ability for the next 10 years, where do I end up? Where am I in 10 years' time? What does that look like, sound like, feel like for everybody around me? If I was to wake up with a full embodiment of my values, where would I be? What impact would I have created? And that is a life that's worth winning, worthwhile leading, regardless of the outcome. Because sometimes people say, I know what I need to do. I need to make $1 million. Or I know what I need to do. I need to double the size of my company. And they do it and they go, I don't know what I need to do next. Maybe I need a bigger car. Maybe I need to buy another watch or something. I don't really know. And the meaning isn't there, because the intrinsic meaning really is based on your values. And, sometimes we can do something in the quiet of our own home that leans into our values. We feel so proud of ourselves, and other people around us might not understand why, but we understand why. And that gives us meaning. And so that's what I encourage people to do. If you want to have more meaning, live your values, and you can, by so doing, you'll just feel that sense of internal pride around you. And often what I'll find also as a last point on that is, if you're living your values, in some way, it's most likely to light up somebody else. Most likely it will have a positive impact on somebody else. And to come back to, because this is fresh on my mind, having just seen this Madonna show, and we talked about it yesterday. I went yesterday. When we were at the show, Madonna said, do you want to know how to change the world? Just be a light for one person. Help one person today turn their light on. And by so doing, you're going to make this world somewhat better. And often, if you're leaning into your values, that's what you end up doing. You don't end up necessarily like doing more things for yourself, but you do something that matters, that might make one other person smile.
And when you live in your values, it's things that are important to you, or things that you just enjoy doing, or like, what would you say to people? Like, how do I know what my values are?
It's a good question, and there's a few different ways to test this out. One way that you can do this is, if I said to you, I'm going to give you $1 billion, but there's just one thing that you have to do to get it. And you just notice, what is the point of resistance? If I say, I'll give you $1 billion, but a friend of yours has to go to prison. Or I'll give you $1 billion, but you have to chop off one of your legs. Or I'll give you $1 billion, but you can never speak to your family again. And there'll be a point where you go, okay, I don't like some of them, but that one in particular, you're never having that. And so it might be the sense of, you're not taking one of my legs. It doesn't matter if you give me 400 billion. I'm never giving you one of my legs, because health is a value for me. Oh, wait, health, fitness, that's a key thing for me. That's how I want to live my life. It matters to me to have that sense. Or it could be the biggest resistance is that you'd never want to do it if you ended up putting the blame on one of your friends going to prison, because friendship matters more to you than anything else. That comes before everything else. So it's that sense of, I'd love to have this, but I'll never cross this line. This is a red line for me. I will never go in that direction, because it crosses a line about what I believe. And so you've got to work out, what are your red lines, things that you would never do. And from there, you can translate back to that. Another way to do this that I've helped people with is to figure out your story. So you can figure out, what do you want, and then figure out why you want it. So I was working with a guy once, and I said, what are your values? And he said, well, my number one value in life is money. And I said, okay, well, actually, money is something you want, but it's not your value. So tell me your story about money. And he said, well, when I was younger, I didn't have any money. When I came home from school, I didn't know where I was going to sleep. I didn't know if I was going to eat. The only meal I was guaranteed each day was at school. And it was my school lunch. And he said, now that I'm older, I've got a wife, I've got a child. I want to make absolutely certain that they've always got a roof over their head, and they've always got 3 meals a day. And I said, I think what you're saying is that your value is actually security. That's what you're going for. He said, you're right. That's it. I want security. That is a key thing for me. That matters to me. It matters that I give that to the people around me. And so he wanted money, but the story around money told me what his value was. So again, people can write down, what do you actually really want? But then write the story. Why does that matter? What it could be that you want money or you want to achieve something because what you really want is for your parents to feel proud of you. Well, why do you want that? Because you want greater connection with your family, because family matters above everything else. So figure out your story behind what you want. You'll figure out your values.
That's awesome. It's funny because I can just keep asking questions. Yeah. So can I do want to ask you one more question. This will be, I promise this is the last question. So with what you just said, as I'm listening to the security as being the value, it would almost seem like that's why people will stop, because you may say, well, I'll feel security when I have $5 million, but yet you may feel security at $500,000 for your family. So there's not really any desire or need to push beyond.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's something that kind of just occurred to me as I was kind of listening to you.
It's a great one. It's a really good one to tap into, because sometimes people think I'll get the feeling of this value if I get something externally, and actually you can find that there are people who they never achieve it because they're always looking externally for it rather than looking internally for the resolution to that piece. And so it's really never about that sense of getting something. It's generally about giving something. So if you imagine, I mean, I'm sure people may have heard the phrase, if you want to feel love, be loving, because you'll get that sense internally. It's not about getting someone to love you. Actually, if you are loving towards others, you will feel love. And so you can translate the same thing to pretty much any value. So in order to say fulfill health as a value, you don't have to complete running the Boston Marathon in less than 3 hours. You can just choose today for lunch that you're going to have some salad and vegetables with whatever else you're having and just feel good about it. Or you can just say, do you know what? I'm going to get 8 hours sleep. That's me having healthiness. Or it can be, choosing to make some healthy choice for somebody else that's around you, and helping them be healthy makes you feel better and actually contributes to your own health. So it's not necessarily about getting something because you'll constantly be chasing more. It's actually more about looking internally about what does that mean to you.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you. And I realized my last gesture was wrong. It was the wrong hand. But listen, thank you for being on the show. It's been awesome. For everybody listening, make sure you go grab a copy of the book, Lift Your Impact. And I just want to say thanks, man. It was awesome. And
thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, brother. Have a good rest of your day.